Spectrovision Radio.
Welcome to Gods, Ghosts, and UFOs, the biggest podcast in the universe, people, where we talk about all the things they said weren't real. And I'm joined by my super besties, BFFs, Mallory Everton and Jordan J.E. Peterson. Hello, my lambs.
Hello, Tom.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm so good.
You
Today
seem
we're
good.
talking about possible Sasquatch sightings in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. We're talking about visible auras and the reality of our auras and possible non-human intelligence satellite technology that we may have discovered. And
Can I say something before we kick it too?
yeah.
I tend to have conversations with Uber drivers that stay with me forever. And I drive in a lot of Ubers. And last night I was in an Uber at 12:30. And a guy, the driver, his name was Freddie, he was asking me all about the various work I was doing. And I was like, oh, well, I'm trying to do this and this. I'm doing a lot of stuff for very little money, but I'm really happy. And mentioned this podcast. And can I just say, doing this podcast and being able to talk to people about this podcast is enabling something that I was already trying to do in my life before, but now I have like a direct in, which is I make a podcast about all the unexplainable things. What's happened to you? And then, and this man tells me a story about an inexplicable, he witnessed something terrifying at church where he saw someone possessed and then had a very scary experience as a child and then had all of these dreams that have since come true. And I was like, oh my gosh. We basically told each other we loved each other as I got out of the Uber. You know what I mean? And I just wanted to
that's
say,
amazing.
Thank you for the in, boys. Thank you for
my
the in.
gosh.
Oh my God, are you kidding me?
That's incredible. That's incredible. Now I want to hear his stories. Like,
It's that, you remember the author who took the Uber in New Orleans and the
Yeah,
psychic
yeah.
told her how
Yes.
to finish her book and then they're crying and hugging it. See,
Yes.
that's how most human interactions should end, with hugging and
Yeah.
not necessarily crying. But anyway, Yeah.
Yeah.
well, I feel fortunate to be with you guys, and I always do. And anyway, blah blah blah.
There was a study published in the journal iScience earlier this year called Exploring Ultra-Weak Photon Emissions as Optical Markers of Brain Activity. Ultra-weak photon emissions, that's a UPE. What does it sound like?
Something that happens when you get older.
Took me a second.
while I was processing the joke that Tom told, I was trying to make that same joke in my head. And I realized Tom had made the joke.
I've had ultra weak emissions since my 40s.
Stop it. Okay.
I mostly just wanted to ask if there is a word or phrase for the phenomenon when science develops a sciencey way to explain something that has existed in the spiritual or Eastern philosophies for a long time, and then they make it sound more credible and viable. Is there a word for this?
Oh
There's
my
a
gosh.
phrase for
yes.
that.
What
It's a
is
phrase.
it?
We been new. It's an Ebonics phrase.
Okay.
It's an African American idiom, which is like a doy.
Yeah.
We've been new that.
We knew this.
I mean, we don't have to use that, but I am so grateful and honored to be a part of this momentous time in human civilization when white people finally figure it out and then immediately take the credit. Because everything I'm doing when we're researching this, that, or the other is like, oh yeah, that's in the Vedas.
Right.
That's a very Ecclesiastes idea, principle, is that there's nothing new under the sun. Like,
Yeah.
all the things you think you're figuring out have been figured out not only before, but many, many, many times, countless times before. They've been figured out by countless numbers of people. You think it's new because you didn't know about it. I feel like that's almost all of Western science. Like, and I credit where it's due. Like, there's a lot of stuff that we enjoy today that has not been enjoyed, to my knowledge, in human history. That's really cool.
Yeah.
But at the same time, a lot of the things that we think we're discovering about human bodies and psychology and spirituality and all these like science-based discoveries for this thing or that thing. It's like no one in other cultures who haven't lost all this stuff is surprised by. They're like, well, yeah. Like, wait, I'm sorry, you didn't know that?
Here comes the shuffling march of the sallow white people with burned out adrenal glands going like animism. I just like a light bulb.
Right. Or people
Yeah.
who've been existing on a diet of protein bars and protein powders being like, wait, rice and beans? Is it protein?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh,
I've
amazing.
made a mushroom coffee that's going to make me millions. I'm a tech bro, but like they're mushrooms. They're freaking mushrooms, guy.
This is a thing that I think will come up again and again and again.
Oh,
which is,
yes, it
here's a study where it's just a very early study. They, even in the article, were saying this is just the beginning of hoping to possibly be able to use the study of UPEs, ultra-weak photon emissions, coming from the brain, as a way to study the brain that's very non-invasive. It requires no stimulation. It's an entirely passive way to study the brain. So that could be interesting.
There's a corollary between what? The kind of light being emitted in an auric field and
Right.
how one is doing, cognitively or emotionally. Is that the idea?
At this point, all they were really able to say in the study was ultra-weak photon emissions were detected in resting and active human brains. Brain UPE spectra and entropy vary by task, diverging from the background levels. That basically just means like, okay, we're definitely going to read on this person's brain.
Yeah,
It's different than the darkness behind them because they were measuring in complete darkness. Optical readouts correlate with evoked neuroelectric oscillations across tasks. And then basically what I was just saying earlier, represents a novel method for brain monitoring, potentially. They're calling it label-free photoencephalography. Hold on, let me try again.
That's a big word.
Photoencephalography.
Nailed it.
Thank you. That was very difficult.
Have they made images like, whatever, people with halos?
Nope, nothing like that yet.
Okay.
It's very early. This is the opening sentence in the article. The study gives us evidence that the human brain gives off extremely faint light signals that not only pass through the skull, but also appear to change in response to mental states. The researchers found that these ultra-weak light emissions could be recorded in complete darkness, and they appeared to shift in response to simple tasks like closing the eyes or listening to sound. The findings suggest that this faint bright light may carry information about brain activity. And then there were suggestions that they would differ depending on age and stress and overall health. I also appreciated some of the other interesting ideas brought up, like all living tissues release tiny amounts of light during normal metabolism, known as ultra-weak photon emissions. This happens when excited molecules return to a lower energy state and emit a photon. In the process, the light is incredibly faint, about 1 million times weaker than what we can see, and falls within the visible to near infrared range. In contrast to bioluminescence, which involves specific chemical reactions like those used by fireflies, ultra-weak photon emissions happen constantly in all tissues without special enzymes or glowing compounds. So they are only studying the brain now, but they're like, well, maybe light come from other parts of body as well. It's really just establishing that this is just the beginning and that this was a very small study. And then I went to the wellnessfoundry.co.uk to read more about auras, and it all sounds very similar. It sounds very similar, which is exciting.
Yeah.
And makes the study boring.
Well, we rightly maybe suspect that there is at least a materialist corollary to most spiritual ideas or principles. I've always been fascinated by the idea of like what we as human beings interacting with each other can read about each other or understand about each other that seems to be non-sensory. So we think about pheromones, for instance. Like we can't see them. You can't necessarily specifically detect them, but they influence you. Like, we know that they influence our interactions with each other at, like, a really high degree. Like, you can draw a pretty straight line between, like, materialist science and pheromonal attraction. Like, we get how this works. So I'm interested in what other kinds of very, very subtle signals we pass to each other that then we interpret, whether or not subconsciously or consciously. One of the ideas that kind of sparks in my own brain about this is, like, what if we are capable of, on a very subconscious or low stimulus level, detecting the ultra weak photon emissions from other people's brains or bodies. And then what happens is either we respond to those in a subconscious way, or some people, as we know, like the human ability and interpretation of their environment is extremely variable. We are all different in the way that we sort of interpret the world around us. And we know that a lot of people claim to see, quote unquote, auras around people. What if you were subconsciously detecting a lot of very subtle information from another person, and then you, in your own sort of way of world building the world around you, which is what we do. That's how we see. We're not like directly seeing or experiencing anything. We're building an entire paradigm of what we're experiencing out of our sensory information. So interpreting, lots of things, including and perhaps ultra weak photon emissions, and interpreting that into an aura that we then see, actually, like we think we see with our eyes. So what's not happening is light that is strong enough to hit our eyes and activate light cones in our eyes. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the interpretation of these weak signals that we somehow detect into our impression of that person that then would read as an aura.
From the abstract, it is 100% the case, right? That we gather more information and process more information than we're aware of,
by orders
consciously.
Of magnitude.
By orders of magnitude.
Many orders of magnitude, yeah.
Right. And the aggregate of that, combined with our experience and discernment, is what we call our gut, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes you just get a vibe, but it's not just a vibe. It's a whole lot of information that's coming in that you are rightly determining to possibly be a threat or not a threat, And there are people who literally see them, auras. Are they seeing them with their eyes or, I don't know.
This raises the important point. Like, do we see anything with our eyes? And the answer is actually no, you don't.
You see with your brain.
You see with your brain.
Right.
Your eyes give you as much information as they can, but what you are looking at, what you see, me looking at you guys right now is me looking at an image my brain has provided for me based on a lot of information that my eyes have taken in and other senses. And also prior history with you guys, prior knowledge. All these things go into the development of the image that I, quote unquote, see.
Yep.
And so whether or not people see, quote unquote, auras with their eyes, the answer is actually just no. Like, they definitely don't. Just like they definitely don't see anything else with their eyes.
Well, and I keep thinking about this line from the study that I read. It is well established that cells and tissues can communicate via electrical signals, particularly in the brain and heart. A couple of years ago, I had a therapist during the pandemic who made an exception so that I could see her over Zoom. But she was like, I don't ever want to do this ever because I can't feel your heart when I'm not in the room with you. And she was like, I mean that literally. We give off electromagnetic signals, and I think I do better work when I can communicate heart to heart with a person. And so it makes me think about our current fractured world and all of the signals we're missing because of what our bodies are very capable of doing that we are still learning to science up and how to understand. But we have a word like aura or chi or prana to be able to say, man, I just love that person's vibe. And it's like so much more difficult over the phone or through a screen. And that's what we're doing so often now.
It is a truism, I think, on this show and in my own personal philosophy that you should try to avoid or at least have a certain posture toward the mediated experience. If you're seeing something through a medium, or if someone is showing you something or telling you something through a medium or in a way that is mediated about what you should think or feel, that is on a lower level of believability or truth to me than direct experience. Anyway.
Grains of salt necessary.
Mallory, remember way back in our very first episode when you talked about that time you thought you might be seeing your first UFOs, but then it turned out to be just a bunch of Starlink satellites?
Yes.
Well, so that kind of thing has been happening since humans started throwing stuff up into orbit. People think, what's that moving light in the sky? That's obviously not an airplane or a star or a meteorite or whatever. And it turns out it's just a satellite because there are like a bajillion man-made things floating around in low Earth orbit. I always think of that shot in WALL-E where the whole Earth is shrouded in this like cloud of debris, of like brown, dirty debris. That's not too far off from what we are actually living in. In other words, it's hard to spot truly anomalous objects in the middle of all that junk. But what if you could examine the night sky before we started filling it with junk? Enter Project VASCO. That's VASCO, which stands for Vanishing and Appearing Sources During a Century of Observations. What it is this team of astronomers has been digitally scanning old photographic plates from telescopes. These are long exposure images where the aperture was left open for like 45 minutes at a time, and they're from the 1940s and 50s, before Sputnik, and before any human-made satellites made their way into our upper atmosphere. Rather than going into all the specifics of how they studied these images, you can go read the paper yourself if you're really curious. Let's just jump straight into the findings. And what they found was pretty conclusive evidence that there were things in the sky that looked like satellites well before we supposedly started putting satellites into the sky. Lots of things. And the reason this evidence is conclusive is because they were able to rule out other explanations, like defects in old photographic plates, which they did by comparing how many of these anomalous points of light they could see in the night sky that were exposed to sunlight versus segments that were in the Earth's shadow. What they found was that the anomalies were 22 times less likely to appear in Earth's shadow, which is what's known as a 22 sigma result. It means that these anomalies aren't plate defects. They are real things in the sky that need sunlight to be visible, just like the Starlink satellites that you saw, Mallory, except way before we were making satellites. It gets better. One of the clearest examples of these non-star points of light appeared on July 27th, 1952. The date probably doesn't ring any bells for you like it didn't for me, but it turns out to be the exact date of the Washington, D.C. UFO flap. And this was the famous incident where objects were tracked on radar over the Capitol. Pilots saw them, the Air Force scrambled jets, the whole thing. Anyway, it's not just that one either. These researchers also found a very strong statistical correlation between dates of these photographic plate anomalies and major historical UFO reports. So,
wow.
Let's just talk about what these anomalous lights from the 40s and 50s could be. One possibility is that they are some kind of atmospheric phenomenon we don't understand. Plasmoids, anyone? But this isn't a great explanation because it doesn't actually fit with the data that well. It could also be secret military tech. A lot of these appeared during early Cold War nuclear tests. But again, this predates every known timeline of when we could have been responsible for what they saw in these photos. What we know, what the science of this study most strongly supports, is that these are reflections off of metallic objects in very high orbit, up around 26,000 miles up. So to recap, the VASCO team found hundreds of these things that don't match any known natural phenomenon. They avoid the Earth's shadow like they need sunlight, and they correlate with historical UFO sightings, and they all happen before humans put anything into orbit. So, either we were putting lots of things into geosynchronous orbit long before we were supposedly capable of it,
Right.
or these things are something else.
I have questions.
Naturally.
Were they noticed when those plates were made originally? Did they note them in some way?
That's a great question. My hunch is that a lot of these plates weren't necessarily super closely studied, or at least they weren't studied for this purpose.
Right.
Like, you're talking about plates that have hundreds or thousands of points of light or data on them, and so anytime you take a picture of the night sky, you have to be really deliberate about what you're even looking for, because it's just a sea of data.
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
like, are you going to...
Right.
And so they were looking very specifically for this kind of anomaly. They knew exactly what they were looking for.
In a
which is
certain
why they found
orbital
it.
band, right? Could it be organic debris that just got trapped in orbit?
So that's interesting. There's an image of a bunch of hypothetical objects. Basically, they're like, these are the potential shapes that could have made the things that we saw in these photo plates.
Okay.
So it's important to point out that the reason this is so notable is that it's not very natural for objects to be in geosynchronous orbit to begin with, and then for those objects to be large enough and flat enough and shiny enough to be visible in the way that these are visible. So that's why this stuff is notable. It's like this, they look like man-made objects because we don't know of anything else that does this thing, that reflects sunlight in this way and appears this way in the sky.
Sorry. My plebe question is like, does that mean metal?
Yes, metal. Well, I mean,
It has to be shiny metal.
Metal or metallic or something that reflects sunlight. Our brains immediately go to a flat metallic surface because that's the kind of thing that reflects sunlight in the way that we are familiar with from our own satellites. So again, this diagram of all these different potential shapes, which are just guesses based on what the data shows. Could it be a natural object? Maybe, but they haven't been able to figure out what kind of natural object could do that. So we don't know. I mean, it is not conclusive evidence of non-human or human-made objects in the sky or non-natural objects in the sky, but there isn't a natural explanation that fits the data. And also, it's so smart. It's so smart because it says, hey, you know this big problem we have with not knowing whether or not these sightings of strange lights in the sky are man-made or not? There's this window of time where we were collecting really good data of the sky before we had put things in the sky. And so that's the data that they're looking at, which is just like so cool and clever and exciting.
Just the like, we're going to search through like a century-old image or whatever in order to find a mystery. You know, if we look in a certain place, I'm like, oh, yum, yum, yum. Give me more.
I want a John Williams score playing during this story. So that's the sort of feeling that I had while you were talking. I was like, I don't know what this is, and I love that I don't know what this is. I was actually at one point going to be like, what's your take? What do you think? And I'm like, I'm not going to ask that because I actually think it's more fun to be like, we don't know. Isn't that cool?
And presumably they're still there.
Here's the thing. Part of this is about things that move or don't move, right? Things that are there and then not there anymore. and if they appeared and then disappeared, we don't know where they went.
My child brain was immediately like, man, they used to have all this stuff in the sky, and then they started noticing that we were watching and they took it all out. You know, like it was like my brain wanting to believe.
The two most likely options are the narrative that we've been fed about when we put satellites into the sky is not true, which is a big story. Like, if true is like a really big deal.
Sure.
I also think it's maybe not super likely. I think that's one of those things that's extremely hard to hide, especially because this stuff was happening before the sort of stovepiping of information within the intelligence communities had matured, meaning it had started back in the 40s, but it hadn't gotten to the point that it is at today, which is that no one knows anything. But back in the 50s, I don't think there was a way that they could have kept a program of that scale secret from everybody. Okay, so to me, that seems like the less likely of the two most likely options. The other most likely option is that these are objects that were made by non-human intelligences, or by someone other than the people that we're familiar with, right? Which is very, very exciting. But the place that my brain goes to is, we have this data that shows that these things were kind of like hanging out in the sky. Now it's so much easier to hide those things because again, there's this vast pile of debris in orbit around our Earth, like at every level. And so you don't have to hide anything. Everything's hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, it's like a big dumping ground.
And it's so much so that there's constantly programs that are trying to troubleshoot how to deal with the space trash so that we can continue to do things in space without everything getting kind of like, you know, pummeled to death by
space trash.
Because
guess what? We've been shooting our trash into space.
We have been. Mal's vindicated. You know,
we've been doing it.
Yay for us in so many ways, but like a giant mountain of plastic in the ocean and a bunch of space trash, it's not a good look.
No.
Recently, a man known only as Bill sent a video he shot to the Rocky Mountain Sasquatch organization. Bill wrote that he was on Coyote Ridge in the Sierra Nevada mountains in May, filming his dogs playing, and might have inadvertently caught a cryptid. One of his dogs is looking at the tree line in the distance, and in the background, a dark bipedal figure moves quite quickly from left to right and hides itself behind a tree. And Bill claimed that the figure like parted bushes so it could look at him and his dogs and apparently his son or there's a child there as well. No one noticed this at the time, although the dog appears to actually be looking at the figure. And then the camera pans away and there's just an extended shot of two dogs playing in the snow. It's very cute. Now, of course, the figure in question is blurry and obscured, and this video will never be considered proof of anything. But a couple of details stand out that I want to share with you guys. One, this is clearly not a hoax. This thing is not centered. It's hard to spot. It clearly does not want to be seen. Except for the dog, as I mentioned, no one even notices it. The camera pans away after only a few seconds. It's not centered in any way, and no one's doing bad hoax acting, which you see all the time. The dog is looking more or less right at the thing, turns around and walks away. Had that been a human being, the dog probably would have started barking or growling or something. Third, the creature moves in a gliding motion. It's moving very quickly. Were a human being to move that quickly, it would be the sort of jerky, boundy thing. And part of Sasquatch lore or evidence of eyewitnesses is that they do tend to move in a gliding type motion. And it's apparently and sort of obviously covered in dark fur, and its head is conically shaped, very conically shaped. And it should be noted that the Sierra Nevada mountain range, as well as the rest of the Pacific Northwest and up into Canada and Northern California, is basically Sasquatch ground zero. There are so many sightings. And this is where the Patterson-Gimlin film was shot. This is where those creepy Sierra sounds were recorded in the early 70s. I don't know if you've heard them. They're crazy weird. And this is the place of countless sightings and centuries of First Nations legends. And speaking of that indigenous predicate, I came across a Kwakiutl figure known as the Wild Woman of the Woods. And she goes by many names, like the Zunukwa and Pitch Woman, and is a member of a family of giants, according to legend. The Wild Woman is used as a deterrent by parents who don't want their kids wandering off, and they claim that she grabs, kids and puts them in her basket and puts pitch on their eyes to blind them and then takes them home and eats them. And then if you find her and trick her, she can bring you good fortune. But it was her physical description that really struck me. She's very tall. She's covered in dark fur. She has pendulous breasts and recessed eyes and hollow cheeks, and her back is hunched, and she walks with a shuffle. Cut to the Patterson-Gimlin still of Patty looking at the camera. Masks of her bear a pursed lip expression immediately reminiscent of chimpanzees. And so I looked up, what does this mean as an expression for chimps? And it conveys a number of meanings, but these include excitement or affection, reconciliation, and playfulness. And I read a quote about the Wild Woman by Wedlidi Speck, who's a member of the Nangis Nation. And this is what they said. Through my cultural sojourn, I learned that the Sonukwa was more than a mythical creature that stole children and ate them. She was a symbol of feminine grace, strength, wealth, and mystery. For example, she was the symbol of our Kwagul Unity feast dish. New chiefs put her mask on their face to symbolize their step into leadership. Chiefs walked through their village wearing the mask to announce a potlatch, a ceremonial feast characterized by the giving away or destruction of property to demonstrate wealth. And the deepest meaning, the Sunakwa represents the feminine spirit of the forest, her cave being the womb where wealth is born. Rather than simply taking children, stealing children, during a rite of passage ritual, she places the child in her basket, and this makes space for the adolescent or young adult to emerge. There is much to learn about feminine psychology by studying Sunukwa myths.
You know what's interesting to me is that as you're discussing this, indigenous cultures or histories that are very, very far removed from my own, it just feels so strange. It feels so other to me. But then also there's this almost this deep recognition, like the human aspect of it, or the deep biology of it. Like, what is nurturing? What are these progressions through different phases of development? Like, how do you become a leader in a community? How do you become an adult from a child? These things that are so deeply baked into our bodies and our psychology, and then shown through this lens that is so other. It's almost like like a nightmare that you're not afraid of. I don't know. I really love it, and I'm like disturbed by it, but in like I think a good way.
I mean, it's impossible to escape the mystery and the misunderstood nature of the feminine, just in general. I'm thinking about this essay I read a couple years ago in a book called Face, 1 Square Foot of Skin by Justine Bateman. And I love her. I'm actually named after her character from Family Ties. And she wrote this book. and she's just kind of a cool, crusty broad. And she wrote this book that's sort of compiling all of these different stories of women being at odds with their image and this square foot of skin that women are often shrunk down to. And there's one in particular that sat with me for a long time. It was about kids reading a story about a scary, scary old woman. And, you know, it made me think about the hot woman turning into an old lady in the bathtub in The Shining. It made me think about how, like, when you were describing the woman with the swinging breasts and the sunken eyes, it's like, okay, so every horrifying female creature in horror movies, which is like witches, and a woman who doesn't look like a sex object is just terrifying.
A crabbed and malignant old woman.
Yes. What we say about witches and the idea that she actually might be participating in these rites of passage, not just killing and eating people. You know what I mean? It's like it's our pattern of misunderstanding. It's not like we just do it with women. We do it with everything we don't understand. So I like that you bring up aliens too. And it's like, first we're terrified, then we try to tell their stories for them, and then we let them speak. But it does seem like that's first we're terrified and we point. Maybe after terrified and pointing we laugh, then we try to tell their stories for them, then we let them speak.
One thing, her expression is one of reconciliation or playfulness. The Tsunuqua can apparently shapeshift and change its form. When you were talking about the 1 square foot of skin, is that what it is?
Yeah, it's called Face.
I immediately thought of this thing I heard Alan Watts talking about, which is the mask, the Greek mask, the mask of comedy and tragedy, is where we got our word persona. And it's 2 words, per or through which sona, the sound comes. And I think about the Tsunuqua mask and her expression. And I think about the crone, the witch, who's like doing dealings with the devil and supernatural stuff, but in fact is just possibly a wise woman. And all that stuff just goes into my head about the masks that we wear, the masks that we made for the wild woman of the woods, but in fact she literally brings wealth to us. Beautiful stuff. The last thing I want to point out is when you look at the film, see if you saw what I saw or interpret it the way I did, which is that the creature, apart from being very fast and bipedal and with a conically shaped head, appears to me to look and act like an adolescent. And so this idea of like running and hiding behind a tree and getting in the bushes to like stare at the activity feels very adolescent to me. Like, I'm going to spy on what, I don't want to miss out on what's going on. And what is a dog? I want to look at that, as opposed to the adults, which always basically like, get the hell out. Whenever you see anything that looks like a credible video of an adult Sasquatch, they're just like, okay, bye. They're leaving. And this one is so curious and interested. And that speaks a lot to me. Anyway, and it made me think of the young adult emerging from the wild woman's basket.
What a special, risky time of life. And that would be, if there were things that didn't want us to see them, it would be the teens that would 100%. Make the mistakes.
100%.
Participating in hazing rituals. Hey, go
seeing
check
what
out
they
that
could get
family
away
over
with.
there.
How close can you get?
How close can you get?
Oh my God, they smell so bad. Reminds me of that thing in Roots in that teleseries from the 70s where they're talking about like, when you meet a white person, they smell like a wet chicken.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I watched the video over and over again while you're talking, of course. And I think the thing for me that gets me the most is that head shape. It's a strange head shape because it does kind of just look like a person back there. I hear what you're saying about the gliding, but some people are graceful. But
Yeah, absolutely. Not me.
I mean, it's downhill. It's probably rocky over there. I do think you would need to be someone who's very used to downhill running, like on terrain like that, if you were going to be able to look that smooth as you were running. But it's that shape. It's either a person wearing a very interesting hood, almost like a woman with a bun on her head with a hood in order to get that shape.
And if it's a hoax, right? If you're like, oh my God, I dropped so much money on this amazing suit.
Yeah,
I'm reminded of that great scene in Signs where the sheriff comes over and she's talking to them about this thing that they saw because one of the aliens was like stalking around their house and they went outside to chase it down because they thought it was just like, they thought it was a couple of adolescents pulling pranks or whatever. And so they go outside to intimidate these hooligans,
right.
And what they end up encountering is this figure that they can't track because it's moves too fast and ends up like sort of jumping over their house. And so they're trying to explain to the sheriff what they saw, and they're like, he moved like way faster than I think he should have been able to. And she's like, I don't know, I saw some of those Olympic jumpers. And so like Mel Gibson is like, so you think that an Olympian long jumper was harassing our dog in the backyard and then dressed up, and it's just, just like when you try to apply the basic, maybe it could have been this, and you start stacking enough of those potential explanations, and they become much more absurd than the suggestion that maybe this is something that is not necessarily fully human.
Right.
I think about that scene a lot.
It's called Occam's razor.
Yeah.
And not Occam's sledgehammer, where it's like, if there's any possibility of a prosaic explanation, that's what did it. It's an Olympiad.
Yes.
No, that doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
No, I was thinking about the auras thing, and also this story about misunderstanding the feminine, or misunderstanding people. I think misunderstanding aliens, being terrified by things. And I was thinking about the auras thing from the lens of my Mormon background. The thing that we used to talk about as kids is whether or not you had Christ's image in your countenance, like if you could see that you had like the spirit with you. And there's one specific Janice Cap Perry song, which is, she was a, what do you call it? She was a Christian musician. And it kept running through my head. It was, have you received his image in your countenance? Does the light of Christ shine in your eyes?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's auras.
Yeah.
It's auras and ultra weak photon emissions.
But it's also halos, and people like spiritual leaders. Have always been, those who are
with
revered,
halos and
are always spoken of
like
as
auras of light.
Yes, as emitting light.
Yeah.
Being beings of light, shining light. And this is across all, it's not just Mormons, it comes from
totally.
everywhere.
Yeah.
So,
ubiquitous.
and also getting Mal to sing, yay.
Hearing Mal sing that song, that was never going to be on my bingo card.
Just the whipped cream on top of the shake.
Yes.
I just think it's genuinely very fun to be making all these connections from all these different corners of what it is to be a person, to grow up with any kind of way to make sense of the unseen.
And to embody the divine.
Absolutely. Well, and to call it light. To call it light, and then to have science be like, it is. We do need a term that is not three white people saying something from the bottom.
How about this? Materialist appropriation.
Materialist appropriation.
I think that's pretty good.
We know that you can scrape the bark of this tree and ingest that and feel better, but we've packaged it, so give us money for it. And by the way, scraping trees is now illegal.
Yeah. And you're not allowed to do that anymore.
That's evil. Don't do that.
If you're new here, be sure to check out our Substack, where you can find a lot more cool stuff and share your own stories with us. Just head over to godsghostsufos.com or find the link in the description. Also, a quick reminder that no matter where you're listening, reviews really, really help other people find the show. So, hint, hint, please leave us one. All right, thanks again. See ya.